Hi. Just waiting for people to join, so it won't be a second. So let's see. There's a few people watching. So hi, Ellie. How's it going? Hope you're, not too bad. Strange times. Here we go. So I get a slight sort of satellite delay at this beginning stage, which is why it often seems a bit disjointed. But once we get going, I'll turn this off and just talk to the camera. So I'm hoping to go. I'm meant to be going out today. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to brave the shops. So go down there, doing a bit of shopping for my folks. So my mum's still quite keen to go out to the shops, but luckily she's given me a shopping list, so I'll go out there today and get a few bits and pieces done, which would be good. I'm not really sure what the best time to go is, really. I guess you want it to be as quiet as possible, but I'm not sure. Okay. Right, I think we'll just crack on and see how we get on. Okay. Okay, so here we are, week 2. So hopefully there's a few of you out there watching and or catching up. So yeah, I was really pleased with last week. I thought it was good. Nice to see, some people sending me some work. So first thing I wanted to say is just a little reminder to if you want to share some of your work that you produced with me or any of the other group, you can use the hashtag on Instagram EAC Tutor. Okay, so we'll pop that up there. Oh, okay. Let's pop that up there. EAC Tutor. All one word. Okay, that's just slightly out of shot, isn't it? Let's try that again. Actually, just notice that's mirror image. Sorry about that. Let's see, what does that mean? Okay, I'm sorry folks, you're just going to have to bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to try and flip that round because I'm going to try and do a bit of writing this morning, so that's not going to be ideal. So if you just bear with me. Phew, there we go, it wasn't too difficult to sort out. Okay, yeah, so hashtag EAC Tutor. So that's for those that want to share their work. So one of the things I was really hoping to do with these classes is just give people a sense that they are, we can all paint at home, but hopefully this will give a way for people to basically connect with other people and just feel that they're sort of part of something, because I think that's really important at the moment, because we're all become so fragmented and we're all sort of sitting at home. Just trying to create something where we can come together and sort of share stuff seems like a really positive thing to do. So I think Teresa's the only one who's uploaded anything so far. Very nice painting she did last week of a pepper, so you can have a look at that. But I'm hoping a few will appear as the weeks unfold. So EAC Tutor. Okay, So that's the first thing. Second was a little reminder about PayPal. So thanks for those of you that have subscribed. So I moved from Patreon back over to PayPal, which seems like a better system for taking payment. And I basically set it up so you've got 2 tiers. Obviously, everyone can watch these videos for free on YouTube, and I'm sure eventually they will all become available. But really, I just created tiers for people that want to participate at different degrees. So the first tier is basically you can watch the videos, and also after I do these sessions, there is a Zoom tutorial session. As a basic member, I will send you the Zoom tutorial because I record them, and so you can follow along and see what people have said and use that to inspire you through the week. And also send me any work you produce or ask me any questions. For full membership, you can basically participate in the feedback sessions and the Zoom meetings. Okay, so that's really, it's just the degrees of participation that you want. So that's how I sort of set that up. And yeah, so that's how we're going to do it. And I wanted to say a couple of things just about working from home. So obviously there are a few challenges. Some of us have got still work going on, and it's difficult to get out. So I just wanted to encourage you, if you are going to follow along, just to follow the principle. This is one of the things I try to get across in the class, which is to focus initially on the ideas we do. Focus on quantity. Okay, versus quality. Quantity versus quality. And what that means is these ideas, these are like almost like for a musician, you're learning scales. Okay, so you're really not trying to create finished artworks. These are just like the fundamental building blocks. So in order for those building blocks to go deeper, it's better just to try and practice a bit every day, and just to try and focus on just building up some quantity. So at the end of each week, you should be able to say, well, I've done like 3, 4, 5 little drawings or studies. And if you focus on the quantity, the quality will emerge. The problem of doing it the other way around is you can become so sort of tight and sort of so worried about how good your work is that you don't do as much. Okay, and that doesn't help progression. So you just better to do loads. That's my first sort of tip. Another thing was about reference material. So I say we're largely sort of carrying on with this theme of still life, but it did occur to me that that's not going to be perhaps as easy for everyone to set up as others. So what I was going to suggest is if you can't work directly from life, or it's difficult to get the lighting, then you've got several options. You could get reference material online. Okay, so there are some good strategies for that. You can most tablets and phones have the opportunity of screen grabs, so you can watch things online and take images from those. That's quite good. And also, if you look online for sort of royalty-free images, stock photographs of still life and that sort of thing, you can find stuff like that. Obviously, those are sort of second best. The ideal thing is to try and set something up, or just go out in the garden and draw from life if you can. Okay. But don't get too worried about this being still life. If at some point you decide you want to try and work from more landscape, or just try and work from any sort of subject you want, then that's not too much of a problem, because as I say, what we're doing today, overlapping forms, is sort of fundamental to all the subjects that you might explore. Okay. So this week's project, so what I'll do is for everyone that's signed up, basic members and full members, I will email you out the this week's project. But for those of you that are following along at home, what I've got in mind is I would like you to create a number, about three images to submit at the end of this week. Exploring this theme of overlapping forms, which is what I'm going to explain. Okay, so the three that I would like to see are, let's put this in. So we'll have number one is just simply a line drawing, no tone, just using outline. Okay. Number two is some form of tonal painting. That could be any medium you like, watercolours, oils, gouache, something like that, pastels, even if you want to get the pastels out. Just working in monochrome for that one. So again, that sort of ties us up with what we did last week. And then thirdly, if you can do a little colour painting, that will be good as well. Okay. So you're looking at line, tone and colour as ways of looking at overlapping forms. Okay. So we've got all week. Wednesday I'll do my own little demonstration painting, and then if you can get them in by sort of late Thursday, or you can upload them to the Instagram site, then I can collect them all and get some feedback. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at this week. So on with the theory. Let's just turn this over. Okay, so overlapping forms. So what I wanted to say is it's perhaps useful at this stage just to understand how this sort of theory ties up with the bigger picture of learning to draw, okay, or paint. So I tried to break it down into these three categories. You'll see this relates to the homework. So line, tone, colour. So with learning any sort of skill, what we're trying to do, or what I try and do in my classes, is you take something that is very complex and you try to break it down into more manageable chunks, okay? And then if you can practice each of those chunks, you can then bring them all together, and that's really the way to become a better artist. So at first, it's a bit like, say you try and draw a picture of, someone's dog or something like that, then you're working with all three elements simultaneously, and that can be quite challenging. So it's best to try and focus on these in chunks, and that can help. So when you're thinking about line, what you're really thinking about there is drawing, proportion, okay. Other things might be composition, because composition often relates to how these shapes sort of tie up with each other. And this is also where this overlapping, so simple forms, okay, So your ability to be able to render these things like spheres, cylinders, cubes, all of that really comes under line, okay? So that really is line, and just drawing generally is where people can make the best progress with their painting or whatever they're doing, okay? So this is why working from observation is probably the best thing you can do, because in some form or another you'll be practicing these skills, okay? So tone, light and dark, that's what we looked at last week, okay? So that is not, tone is our values and how light and dark helps describe the three-dimensional world, okay? It also relates to things like, there's just tonal composition, which is, you know, light object on a dark ground and such, okay? But yeah, so once you've got the hang of line, then you get the hang of tone. You can also use tone to create depth and atmosphere and those sorts of things. So you try to get the hang of that. One of the first books I got on painting was where I got this idea of just working monochrome. Okay, so you could actually spend ages just painting in either umber and white or black and white, and your painting would also develop, you know, a great deal then. Colour tends to confuse things, so working in monochrome is a very good strategy. And then colour theory, so you would learn the colour wheel, complementary colours, okay, atmospheric perspective, how colour responds in light, all those sorts of things. And slowly this would all start to come together, and you would become basically, your paintings would become richer and more accurately sort of represent reality, okay? So as I say, last week we looked at tone, and if you remember, what I was talking about was that these ideas are really about your ability to create a feeling of depth, turn that two-dimensional space into three-dimensional reality. So that's what we are up to in all this, okay? So that's like a broad overview, and I say this is how I sort of generally, where people come to my classes, that's how I structure it, okay? So let's have a look. Okay, so overlap. So in some respects this is very simple, so let's just so there's our bottle. Now when children draw, let's say this bottle's on a table, okay, they'll draw this, and obviously this destroys the feeling of space, because it renders this bottle transparent, okay? So one of the first things you learn is well, if we cut this out, okay, and you draw like that, then you start to get the illusion of depth, okay? So what we are interested in here is this, okay? So what you get there is these T's, okay? And these T's, they help represent overlaps. And in some respects, this is almost like so simple you take it for granted. However, within it is quite a powerful idea. So let's say we're doing a still life, and we come up with a composition. So in fact, even the pomegranates video, which I uploaded the other day, you have two objects, let's say like this. So two sort of spheres like that, they don't really, there's no sense of depth, it's basically a flat image. Now, as soon as I put even my background line in, like that, you've got some feeling of depth, you see. And so what I'm trying to get across here is actually the more times, the more of these T's and the more of these overlaps you can introduce or discover in your subject, the more sense you're going to be able to get of this feeling of depth. So, say for example, even if I put my shadow like this, okay, that shadow has also created these two T's. So we have one here and one here. That should be a red pen, really. So that's the idea. So in a way, it's just a reminder of that simple sense that the more overlaps you can get, the more depth you can create. So let's try something here. Okay, I'll just move that slightly so you can see that. So, we've got an apple there, and a plate or something like there. Okay, and then another bottle there. Background there, something like that, maybe even another overlap like so, and so on. Okay, maybe even a bit of fabric there. So every time I create these overlaps, I create these layers. That's not particularly good there. So with that in mind, you can start to construct your still lives to exploit that idea. And that's what I'm going to try and encourage you to do here. But there are other situations where it becomes useful, okay? So, say for example, let me just... One of the books I've been dipping into, actually, which I'm going to borrow this one diagram. So this book, Seeing with a Painter's Eye, Rex Brandt, okay? He's mainly a watercolor artist. And this is a good book on watercolors. Okay, but he's got some really good stuff in here about sort of like horizontals, diagonals, just different ways of thinking about art and thinking about design, and very good. So like here he's playing with vertical formats, square formats, etc. Okay, so how he does this thing about the overlapping forms is like this. Let me see. Let's just see if this marker's really good. Okay, so that might work a bit better. Okay, so he's got a picture of, he's saying think of it like playing cards. So we've got one there, okay, and then that overlaps that. Okay, then that overlaps that. And what he's doing is basically creating all these overlapping forms. Now, what he does is he actually just denotes this so that he puts a plus and a minus. Plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus. It's just to reinforce the idea that which object is in front of which, okay? So that comes there. And then, let's see, we've got some stuff here. Okay, all these overlaps, and what this is, running out there. I need to get myself some markers, so we'll do this. Is flowers, okay? This is a vase of flowers, if we imagine this and this, okay? And this is sort of a schematic version of it, but it gets away from this sort of so often people draw flowers and it's like this, okay? And when you have this sort of arrangement, okay, there's obviously no depth. So he's saying even in these forms like flowers or a vase or something like that, you can create. So even like here, we could have an overlap there, maybe an overlap there. Okay, so whenever you get these T's, you are introducing this feeling of depth. Okay, and quite quickly you can build up this feeling of form or space or volume, okay? So this would be quite a good subject to try it out on, something like maybe a plant or something. I think something with fairly big sort of leaves. So like with this one, if you introduced more overlap, things breaking up like that, and maybe even leaves coming in front of the vase or something like that, you know, anything like that is going to help you create that sense of sort of volume and space, even without the shading. But obviously we can think the more you can combine these, the more powerful your sense of space is going to be. Okay. Yeah, another way to think about this is there's other things you can do. So those of you that are going to be painting, one of the things I'd like you to try is this, which is, let's say we've got a still life composition, okay, like that. So an easy way that you could introduce, you can think of it as having like foreground, middle ground, background, okay? So these are like, I don't know if you ever see these where people cut out silhouettes, okay, of card and have one layered on top of the other, and it creates just this sort of illusion of depth, okay? So if this was our still life subject, you can use, say, fabric. So you could have, let's say, a piece of fabric in here. Okay. Now, again, each time I do that sort of thing or that, I'm creating an overlap, you see? So let's imagine this is our sheet. Okay. So it comes in like that. So that gives us a foreground. Then we might have an overlap. There's something like this. This is partially inspired by one of my still lives last term. Okay, overlap there. So maybe that would be better for that to also come and overlap the bottle. Okay, then that comes there, and we might have another couple of overlaps there. Now, do you see instantly that's created the feeling of depth, okay? So this is no longer perhaps just a flat space, there's depth there. And I say you could also perhaps, you know, use fabric. I mean, here's a device you often see is like this sort of thing. Okay, this could be a curtain or something like that, or some way also to create an overlap that way. So you're thinking foreground, middle ground, and then distance. So you can try to exploit that. In fact, theoretically, imagine you could actually introduce the overlap going the other way, which is you could have fabric coming here, say, and then overlapping the bottle that way. So this would be like in landscape, let's say you've got some big forms here, okay, then you've got something in the middle ground. Let's say, okay, let's make this some sort of landscapey sort of situation, okay, like that. Then you've got behind that, let's say you've got some sort of cloud formations, but that cloud then becomes overlapped by a cloud at the front, okay? So the overlaps, you basically have big, medium to small, but then that small is overlapped by that, and that. And you see, so this is forward, negative, forward, and then going back and back and back. And that can also help create the feeling of depth. So it doesn't just have to go one way. Yeah, so what the other thing I wanted you to have a go at was this with the overlaps. So let's just do, here's a pair, okay. Now, let's say we've got our horizon here, or some line that breaks it like that. So there's something you can do which is really good in your painting, which is to create different edges. So if I soften that edge, okay, and that edge, that helps to reinforce the feeling of depth. Very simple idea. So it's a bit like the idea of photography. So things that are in the distance, okay, are going to be out of focus. And that will help things. It's a good idea anyway to vary your edges, not to have everything hard edged, okay. There's also a it doesn't have to be things that are in the edges. So like, for example, when I was talking about that bit of fabric, so let's say I've got this and it comes up. Ooh. Yeah, it comes up in front of here. Okay, you can also make this soft. You can make this soft, okay? And then you can say, I'm just going to let this edge be a hard edge. And what that does is it helps to create focus, okay? And that's quite a nice idea as well. So you can actually think of having a narrow depth of field, and the things that you're interested in have hard edges, and your background and other objects have more diffused edges. So that's something I would sort of consider playing around with. Let's have a look. So I would recommend, so with your line drawing for this, it might be, I think once you start to play around with it, you'll get the gist of it. It might be quite nice to go out into the garden and have a go at doing something like that, because what you can do is, basically you're tuning in to space, and you're looking for near and far. And so this is this thing about seeing with a painter's eye. You're trying to work out, well, what makes for a good painting? And so the more things you can see with this overlap. So let's say you're in the garden, you're going to have, like, say, plant pots, okay? Plant pots. Okay, like so. And then you're going to have sort of things in the distance. Let's say you've got a bird table. and a fence. So here you go, you've got an overlap there. Maybe some trees, an overlap there, an overlap there, an overlap there. Maybe a house, and then overlap there. Maybe more overlaps in the sky with clouds. And I'm sort of getting ahead of myself there, but that's also introducing scale. So you've got big going all the way up to small, okay? So you're just looking for how many overlaps can I find and how can I use that to create this sort of, sorry about that. How can I use that to create this sense of depth and space? So it's like the more of these things that I can introduce, the better. I don't know if you saw on the, I think it was Sky Portrait Artist of the Year, no, Landscape, and there was this thing where someone had done this painting and I can't remember what it was. It was like some sort of building up here, might have been an abbey or something, and that abbey was lit from the side like that, okay? And then they'd done some bushes or something in the foreground. Okay, and the bushes were lit in the other way, okay. And of course the judges picked up on that and they sort of, you know, it doesn't work because they're contradicting where the light source is. And so it's really a case of the more elements that you can introduce into a painting to trick the eye, the more it will sort of buy into it, okay. So that's why it's probably better, it's better initially to avoid things being sort of separate, okay? So with your still life objects, okay, just putting that single thing there is perhaps, if you can introduce more elements, okay, variety helps as well, variety of scale, okay. The more bits and pieces you can introduce, the more overlaps you can get, and that's going to help you at the beginning, okay. Even overlaps here maybe with different things on different surfaces. So you're looking for as much, and then obviously if these are lit correctly and you've got all your shading, say from last week, then your ability to communicate sort of reality is going to improve as well. Okay, like so. Okay, and actually that reminds me of something I was just going to mention, which was because we're talking about overlapping forms here, I was just going to say something about silhouettes. Okay, so when you're setting up, whether it's this or this idea of like cutouts, that like foreground is a cutout and then the middle ground is a cutout and then the background is a cutout. Well, those cutouts, that refers to the idea perhaps of a silhouette of a sort of flat two-dimensional shape. And so when you're designing your paintings, your subjects, you should try to pick silhouettes that really explain what you're looking at. So I was just giving the example I thought was this thing about like the pepper. So for, say a pepper that's upright, say it's got a stalk, okay, it's going to be like that. Something like that. So that silhouette, although I've exaggerated it slightly, is quite good at describing what you're looking at. If you put the pepper down at an angle though, let's say it's like this. Okay, and here's our stalk. So that's a sort of pepper on its edge. This silhouette perhaps might not be quite as effective at explaining the form, okay? Now, you can sort of get away with it because in some cases, and I'm sort of thinking slightly of Teresa's picture of a pear here, if the stalk is a different colour or a different tonal value, then it becomes almost like an object in itself. But if the whole thing was, say, dark, then you've reduced something that has on one side quite a good silhouette to something that doesn't really explain what you're looking at, okay? So other examples might be, let's see, I'll start running out of paper soon. So good example would be like a teapot, okay? So teapot from the side, it's got an excellent silhouette because you know what you're looking at, okay? So basically silhouettes are a very quick way for our brain to read and decipher what we're looking at. If I turn that same teapot towards me, okay, like so, then the silhouette doesn't give me any visual clues as to what I'm looking at, okay? So when we're talking about overlapping forms or overlapping silhouettes, as it might be, say in the case of landscape or some sort of still life situations, try to think about your silhouettes and try to arrange your objects or find angles that most sort of that best describe them, okay? So I'll tell you, just as a little aside, one of the areas where I first came across this idea wasn't actually in landscape. It was life drawing, okay? So again, in life drawing, when you want to create foreshortening, let's say it's a leg, okay? So say the leg's coming towards you, right? Here's a simple diagram of a leg. So to create the feeling of it coming towards you, you try to create overlap, okay? So that this is the knee, okay? And then like there's a sort of muscle there, okay? And the knee is overlapping this form, okay? And then the shin bone comes through and overlaps that form. And then you've got ankles overlapped by the foot. Okay, so every time you get the opportunity to get this overlap in, you basically reinforce your sense of sort of space, volume, okay? And you can also get it, say, with fabric, the way fabric falls. If you look at lots of old paintings, you'll see they use fabric. So again, fabric tends to create overlaps, okay? And the more overlaps, like the better, okay? Or you could probably see the same thing in hair, and so fabric falling, something like that. So once you've tuned into it, it will help you with all the subjects that you're going to try and attempt, okay? So let's just so just to recap, so I want you to try a line drawing. Okay, maybe it might be best not to do that of a still life. Maybe it'd be good to go out into the garden and try to think in terms of silhouettes, try and create overlapping forms, create a sense of distance that way, okay? Then a tonal drawing using our black and white. Now when it comes to landscape, if you are going to do something like of a scene like that, then you can also use tone not simply to create form, but you can do things like, let's say you've got dark forms, okay, so you get this effect that the objects close to you might be darkest, okay, so dark, again there I'm using a silhouette, okay, so it's silhouette. Then you've got, let's say, I don't know, some sort of something in the distance, okay, so make that hazy, and that goes off into the distance, okay, overlaps there, you see, breaking up the vertical. So again, you can use tone also in this way to create depth and distance. And then finally, to do some sort of colour painting. And what I'm looking for is those T's, okay? So the more overlaps you can introduce, so I'll be looking for them, I'll try and count them. Okay, you could even have stuff going on. I mean, if you set it up on a table, this could go on for ages, and you could have like all sorts of like forms, one overlapping the other, and so on, basically. But the more overlaps you can introduce, the better for this week. Okay, yep, so that's what I want you to have a go at. And so just remember, again, try to remember the big picture here. We're just learning these ideas because these help us find subjects, okay? And the subject of space and depth in itself can be good, because if you can shift that two-dimensional plane to create the illusion of depth in a sort of successful way, then people will usually find that interesting and enjoyable to look at. Okay, so there we go. So those of you that are going to be following along, I'll perhaps see some of you in the Zoom meeting at 11. And for the rest of you, if you like the video, subscribe, that's always useful. And I'll be here on Wednesday, and I'll do another perhaps still life demo. Okay, and as a reminder, if you haven't seen it already, I uploaded one that I did a few weeks ago before the coronavirus struck, of my little painting of pomegranates. So that's another little still life you could watch during the week if you're interested. Okay, well, thanks a lot, and I'll see some of you soon. Okay, bye.